My longtime friend, Gloria Greene, is the Assistant Vice President of Contracts and Grants at the University of Alabama at Huntsville, UAH. She has over 30 years of combined contracting experience with federal industry and the university. Gloria is a certified contract administrator and is an active member of the Society of Research Administrators International. Gloria is the president of the Society of Research Administrators International Southern Section right now. Gloria currently serves as on the SRAI Board of Directors as an at-large board member, several SRAI committees and working groups. Gloria is an active member of the Council of Governmental Relations, or as some of us know it as COGR, and she is also active in the Federal Demonstration Partnerships, or FDP. Gloria is very knowledgeable, and I look forward to learning from her today as she presents the other foreign influence, Section 889 of the John S. McCain National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA. So Gloria, please take us forward.
Righty, I'm going to stop my video so that we don't have any unstableness and everything and move forward. Okay, so thank you, Jennifer. Jennifer is my mentor. I sort of latched onto her and haven't let go. So I really appreciate the introduction. So we're going to have so a couple of rules before we get started. Rule number 1, don't sweat the small stuff. Rule number 2, it's all small stuff, right? So we want to just keep that in mind as we go through the presentation. All right, next slide. So our objectives today are, we're going to look at what is Section 889. We're going to look at some compliance requirements for Section 889, and then we're going to look at the implementation on what we did at UAH. And I am, any questions that you have, any input, feedback, I truly will appreciate it. So don't be shy. Okay, thank you. All right, next slide. In the law to comply. So next slide. So what is Section 889? Right. So on August 13, 2018, Congress passed the John S. McCain National Defense Authorization Act, which is NDAA, for fiscal year 2019. So Section 889 of the NDAA includes 2 prohibitions regarding certain telecommunications and video surveillance equipment and services, right? And according to the National Counterintelligence and Security Center and the 2019 Worldwide Threat Assessment of the Intelligence Community, Chinese intelligence and security services may use Chinese information technology firms and their equipment as routine systemic espionage platform. So the increasing reliance on foreign owned or controlled equipment and services and reliance on those that present national security concerns created vulnerabilities in U.S. supply chains. But remember, this applies to all federal funds received by your institution. And when I say that, I want us to make sure we understand. When I say all federal funds, that is, remember, financial aid is federal. So those are federal funds. So we need to be aware of this. So when we are looking at how do we implement this and what impact our failure to implement will have on the entire institution. It's not just research. It's not just contract or grant specific. This is, remember, it's your entire institution must be compliant. Okay, next slide. So these are the companies, and I have a difficult time pronouncing some of these, so I just threw them up there so you can have them, have fun. So these are the companies that are right now currently on the prohibition list for procuring covered telecommunication video equipment and services. Next slide. So when we look at what is covered telecommunication equipment or services, it also includes telecommunication or video surveillance equipment or services provided by an entity that the Secretary of Defense, in consultation with the director of the national intelligence or the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation is reasonably believed to be an entity that is owned or controlled by the government or of a covered foreign country. And we also need to be aware, us as administrators, that they have the right to add additional companies. So you really and truly must, they put these entities on what they call the excluded party list. And you can go get that list is available on SAMS, right? So you go to www.sams.gov, do a search on the entity's name, and it'll tell you if they're excluded. In other words, what they were banned for, or and then what you can and cannot do with the company. Now, we use visual compliance, so a lot of entities are familiar with visual compliance, but it does the same thing that SAM does. And visual compliance normally stay on top of who's been placed on the do not buy list or on the debarred list and so forth. Next slide. So there are two parts to the compliance requirement. If you look section, so part A, this applies to the federal government. And so part A said the Department of Defense has the authority to add additional companies to this list. Part A has been added to the Federal Acquisition Regulation, the FAR. It's FAR subpart 4.21. Also note that Part A also applies to commercial items such as, in the FAR, that's FAR 12.301D6, and then also under micro purchasing, which is FAR 13.201J. Part A, the government just sent out a memo that actually gave an extension to the federal government on this part, on implementing this part. And I'm assuming that they realized that they had a lot more of this equipment floating around in the federal government than they realized when they put this compliance out, this requirement out. Part B basically applies regardless of whether or not the usage is in performance of work under a federal contract. This applies to us, to entities, at universities, nonprofits, industry, regardless of the size. And this application applies to every sector and every dollar amount, right? Your ability to enter into contracts with the government will be impacted by this part. So after conducting a reasonable inquiry, entities will represent whether they do or do not use prohibited telecommunication equipment or services. And we're going to talk a little bit about that when we go into the implementation on what should have been done, or what some best practices on how to do this, right? Part B has been added to the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR subpart 421, and it also has, this part has also been added to Uniform Guidance 2 CFR 200. Next slide. Yeah, you can hit through all of those. Okay. All right. So we go back. All right, thank you. Sorry about that. I should have took those out and I didn't. All right. So implementation of Section 889B for grants and loans. It was an update was done in Uniform Guidance to 2 CFR 200. And what it says is that when the recipient signs an award agreement. So again, let me just back up a little bit for those that didn't hear me. The implementation of Section 889B for grants and loans is through the updates of 2 CFR 200. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about what we need to do too when we issue subawards, to what we how we have to handle our subawards and our contracts. So we'll talk about that in the implementation. But when the recipient signs an award agreement, they are certifying that they will comply with all applicable rules, regulations, laws, including prohibition on covered telecommunication. And so remember, the only way you're going to be able to honestly certify that you are in compliance is that you have in place the proper security protocol, policies, and procedures, and you have done your due diligence to inventory your university, equipment on your university, to ensure that you don't have any of this. Because otherwise, if you're certifying and you haven't done any of that, then in essence, you're basically submitting a false certification because you don't know. We were surprised on where a lot of this equipment was located on our campus once we start conducting a campus-wide inventory. So that's one of the steps, and we'll talk about that in the implementation process as we go through. If the federal agencies suspect that the goods and services being procured under the award may in fact be prohibited, all right, it must follow its own policies and procedures to take appropriate actions that align with the guidance in 2 CFR 200. So that's why I'm saying you have to do your due diligence at your institution, and you got to work with several people, because as research administrators, we don't know, but your procurement office knows who purchased what. Definitely your asset management office knows where these things are. In accordance with 2 CFR 200-307, there's some questions came up, right? So program income cannot be used to purchase these types of equipment, right? So we're familiar with what's allowable. It falls under allowable costs. If the item is prohibited, you can't turn around and use program income to purchase something like that. You can't use covered equipment or as cost share either. So those are some things that we have to keep in the back of our mind as we go through this. Federal, so if your federal approved indirect cost agreement has took in consideration some of this equipment, then there's a couple of things that you can do. One of the things that says that generally you do not need to reopen or amend, but you may need to adjust it in accordance with 2 CFR 200-411. And that the non-federal entity must review its current indirect cost rate proposal or previously negotiated rate to ensure that it does not include expenses associated with covered telecommunication equipment. Next slide. Okay, and one more thing before we move off of this, I'm sorry, well, you can go ahead to the next slide. If a non-federal entity has not included in this proposal as allowable costs, if you haven't included in there, then you're fine. You don't have to do anything, right? If there's none of this excluded equipment, prohibited equipment is not included in your cost. But if it is, then you definitely will need to revise or renegotiate your F&A rate. And again, as I stated, and I'm going to emphasize this several times, that this prohibition applies to existing federal awards, and agencies must ensure that recipients are aware of this prohibition and determine if an amendment is needed on a case-by-case basis. Right. So then when we go into looking at the federal acquisition regulation, the FAR rules, until you update the entity, registration, certs, and reps, and add those FAR clauses 52.204.24 and 52.204.26, in SAMs, you will be required to complete the certs and reps every 30 days. And we're finding this, and it's more so, we found this out through NASA, through our NASA awards and everything. So unless the first thing I would recommend to everybody is go out in SAMs and add those 2 FAR clauses, answer the questions, and complete it. That way, every time you get an award, you don't have to complete the certifications and reps. And then once SAM is updated, then your entity represents in SAM that it does not provide and does not use prohibited telecommunication equipment or services, then you will only need to do that annually, your recertification annually, like we do normally with all certifications. So it's important to make sure who's ever responsible for your updates in SAMs, I would ask them to go in and add to your SAMs certs and reps those 2 FAR clauses, 52.204.24 and 52.204.26. So next slide. And this is what the certification looked like. I'm sure we've all seen it, right? So the FAR 52.204 representation regarding certain telecommunication and video surveillance service or equipment. So you're basically the offer shall not complete the representation, basically, if it does provide those types of prohibited equipment. So normally right now, you have to answer yes, you do, or no, you don't, and you go through and complete those 2 certifications on there. The offer shall not complete the representation in Part D, right, of the certification if it does use covered equipment. So normally what we're looking at is Part C. We're looking at C 52204D, where you represent that you will or will not provide covered telecommunications services to the government. And this is for basically any contracts or grant, and that you do or do not use this. Next slide. Okay, in this slide, there's a reporting clause. This is the reporting clause right here, 52 to 425. And this clause requires us and our subcontractors to notify the government if they identify that prohibited telecommunication equipment or services are being used during the performance, the contract or grant performance. And so that's the reporting requirement. It was not changed by section 889 part B FAR rule that went into effect in August. Next slide. And then 26, finally, this is your annual certification in all solicitations. And this requires the entity to represent whether they do or do not provide prohibited telecommunication equipment or services to the government. And eventually it will require entities to represent whether they do or do not use prohibited telecommunication equipment or services. And that's an update that's currently right now in discussion as to, I guess, how far. So, right now, I don't think it's going away. I think we're going to see a lot more regulations like this coming out from Office of Management and Budget. So, I just think these are some things that we need to get ahead of as best as we possibly can. But again, as I said, that once you update SAMs, you won't have to do this every time you get a new award. Next slide. So there are some possibilities. So if your campus is like, you have an abundance of this equipment on campus, it's being used in research, it's all, all over the place. There are some caveats to this. You can request a waiver. Good luck with that. They basically have stated that the waiver has been delayed. The implementation of the waiver has been delayed. But then here are the guidelines for this delayed implementation, right? So the agency head may, on a one-time basis, for each contractor, delay the effects of section Part A. So they're saying A. Now, remember, we are governed under Part B, right? So you would have to go to the agency and request an approval for a delay to be compliant with section 889 directly to your to your sponsor. And then on a one-time basis, they said that each contractor may request a delay to section Part B through August 13, 2022. The statutes and FAR rules impose additional restrictions to prevent agency granted waivers from being a means of bypassing the prohibition. So if you go out there and look under the ODNI site, if you go to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, there is a process to start this waiver. And I'll just be honest with you, unless it's, I just don't see them granting many waivers. I really do see it's going to be very time consuming on the part of the university, the institution, you as the research administrator, which probably 9 times out of 10 will have to be the one to start the process. So they must notify, and finally they have to notify Congress within 30 days of issuance of a waiver. And I don't think right now anybody want to be in contact with Congress for anything, especially trying to get a waiver to a law or federal requirement that protects national security. Next slide. So when we go through this slide, there are some things that we want to do, right? And then this is what we look at is that what do we need to do, right? As entities, as entities receiving federal funds, because remember we're fiscally responsible. We are the fiduciary of all federal funds that's coming through. So section 889 Part B FAR is about the presence and use of telecommunication equipment and services, no matter the sector, right? So you want to review your federal contract grant and familiarize yourself with the regulation. And then the next thing you want to do is you want to inventory all telecommunication equipment and services. And you have to do this with your purchasing, your procurement, your assets management. This is not something that we in Office of Sponsored Program or Sponsored Research or whatever can do. This is something that has to be done with your procurement office and your assets management. And so remember, under Part A, any equipment or services provided to the government. Under Part B, any equipment or service used by the entity being us. The next thing you want to do is that you want to, after you identify your telecommunication and with the inventory, you want to update your policies and procedures. And then you need to educate your faculty and staff on what to do if prohibited equipment or services are found. And what other thing is, remember that you cannot charge the cost of replacing these items with federal funds. So we have to keep that in mind. So in other words, we have to remove a lot of equipment, maybe terminate some services, whatever they may be, but we have to use our state funds, institution funds will have to be used to replace these items that we are required to take down. And then you want to review vendor standard terms, provisions, their terms and conditions, and then conduct a complete inventory of all of your existing vendors. Where are they getting their stuff from? Where are they, what companies are providing them with the equipment that they're selling to us? Next slide. So I talk a little bit about what we did at UAH, right? So one of the things that we need to keep in mind with the Section 889B is that cybersecurity consists of all technologies and practices that keeps computer systems and electronic data safe, right? And so we're in a world where more and more of our businesses and social lives are online, and it's an enormous and growing field. So remember, the cybersecurity threats, increasing new laws can be placed to protect the consumer from potential attack. This would mean that increased regulations and legislation may soon become a reality. We just have to, it's the nature of the beast, it's what we do. So harsher penalties needed, they're going to be put in place. And then we have to ensure, so what is our job? Our job is to protect our faculty, our research staff. That's what our job is. And so we need to ensure that our faculty, staff, and students are made aware of laws passed and make sure that the institution complies with these laws. So, so in other words, talk a little bit about what we did. The first thing that we did is that we went to procurement and we asked our procurement officers to provide us with a list of all telecommunication and video equipment. So we had one list. Then we asked them to break it out to any telecommunication and video equipment from the prohibited companies, and they did that. So we found on our institution that we had 7 set items that literally fell on the prohibited list. The one that was the most concerning to us is that UAH has a severe weather center, and it had that center had like 3 of the 7 pieces that we found for monitoring things. We sit in a tornado hub, and so the severe weather center was using that to do storm tracking and to share information and data with the National Weather Service, which is also housed on our campus. So we had to disable those and try to find a source, really a vendor really quick to provide us with new equipment to replace what we took down. So after we've identified that, and again, remember, all of this was taken down. The equipment that originally was purchased to start this severe center was purchased using federal funds. Now we have to remove it and use and replace the equipment with state funds, with university dollars. So we did that. The next step that we did after we identified those 7 pieces of items, we removed them. Now, let me tell you, though the research side was not the problem, which I thought was going to be. I thought our researchers was going to kick and scream and holler. It was the academic side that we found we had the most pushback from on removing those other pieces of equipment that we found, especially in our testing area. They had several pieces of that equipment, which rightfully so, to monitor the testing and make sure there's no cheating or all this stuff going on. That was the most difficult part. The next thing that we did, once we identified them and got those pieces of equipment disabled and removed from the inventory and in use, we had to update our policies in both purchasing and the officer sponsor program. And what I'm showing you, that little picture on the slide, is from our office, from our procurement office, where we implemented the new federal acquisition regulations for all purchases, and just basically let them know that from this point going forward, they will require all purchase orders issued for that type of telecommunication, for any telecommunication equipment and video purchase equipment. They would have to, the vendor would have to complete that certification before the purchase order is issued to procure those items. So it's more like a heads up, here it comes, we're gonna procure with you, but we need you to complete this certification. And then we added the representations to all of our subawards, our subcontracts, as well as our purchase orders, is the process it is. So I think if you look at what we did based on the 5 bullets that I'm showing here, it's really, it's small steps. That's why, one of the things that I want to encourage all of us is that, yes, it's a new regulation. Yes, it's something new, that the government has placed on us, and we have to comply. But if you keep in the back of your mind, which is what I tell my PIs all the time, if you want to play with the government's toys, which is their money, you have to follow their rules. And so if we don't sweat it, don't stress over it, then we can get through the entire process. We can do what we need to do to be compliant. Next slide. So what I put here is some links for some additional information where you can go out and get familiar with what's going on, some of the requirements, the regulations, what we need to do as research institutions, institutions of higher educations, as the government would like to refer to us as contractors, regardless of whether it's a grant or a contract. These are some things that some information that I think will help you get through it, to manage it, to put in processes that you need, because trust me, remember, we are now certifying now that we are in compliance with CMMC, that we comply with the other regulation that deals with, I'm drawing a blank, but anyway, we complying with those regulations. This representations and certifications is our way of saying that we are not using any prohibited telecommunication or video services equipment on our campus. And I have to emphasize, it's on the campus. It's not just unique or it's located to just research areas. It's on your campus. So you have to look at all areas of your campus. What are you using in your teaching area? What are you using for teaching? What are you using testing? Are you using video equipment that falls on this list, and for your virtual learning, since we're all virtual, right? And of course, the timing could not have been the worst when you consider that we were all shutting down right after this came through. We're shutting down and trying to get compliant in a regulation that says, hey, if you're using this, we're not going to issue you an award or the follow-on or whatever until you certify. So I am sorry. Okay, next slide. All right, so I'm sorry, and I was trying to keep on track. So I hope, hopefully, if you have any questions, please just ask your questions. And I apologize for all the glitches and everything that took place with this presentation.
Please do not apologize. We really appreciate it. And I was very happy to see that people were staying on the session, and folks were even going and looking up what could be done to try to solve the problem. So we're in a room with about 150 problem solvers right now.
Right, and that's the nature of our profession. I really love it that we come together as research administrators, and we can all. That's one thing that I really love about this profession, is that we will find a way to solve something.
That's right. Just give us a problem. We love to solve problems. That was very informative. Let's see. Okay, we've got a question from Mindy. She said, could you share your OSP policies and procedures that you put into place for this? So,
I will send them to you, Jennifer. And then if you want to share them with all of the participants, that's fine. Or if it's easier, they have my contact information. I think did I put it on there at the beginning of the slide? it probably would. I tell you what, let me manage the traffic, right? Just have them reach out to me and I'll share those policies with everybody. If they just send me an email, it'll be easier for me to do that. Yeah.
Okay, we can do that, or if anyone didn't catch your email, actually, Gloria, you're on your phone now, or you're
No,
on your?
no, I'm on my. Let me put it in the chat.
Put it in the chat.
Okay.
Put it in the chat. And while you're doing that, I'm going to ask another question from Diane Meyer, and she says, "Has there been any concern about people using personal computers while at home, or their phone services, etc.?"
So Diane, one of the thing we so remember this says all covered telecommunication equipment and videos. And so one of the questions that all of us are tackling is, how do you manage that when an individual, with everybody working virtual, right? How do you manage that? Because it's, how do you manage a PI's smartphone or cell phone or laptop that they personally purchased and used for themselves? And we had made the decision at the university is that we were not going to manage that. That if it was not physically on campus, in other words, it was not something that we procured and through our purchasing for work on, either through that we procured it through procurement, we're not going to look at what individual PI uses as far as their laptop and anything concerned. And then the guidance on that is still it's vague. So it's even hard. We were looking at, how do you address that? Our concern because we are a clear facility is that those individuals as a clear facility, they can't do work from home anyway, right? Because you can't get access to, unless the laptop has been approved or the computer's been approved for you to get access and log into it. So we're not looking at that. We really aren't.
Okay. Hank Glaspie, who presented yesterday about CMMC or CMCC?
CMMC,
CMMC. I've asked him to open up his mic, and he has a question as well.
Okay.
So we've, in my area, Office of Cyber Risk and Compliance, we've seen the regulations that you were talking about, specifically with procuring technology and excluded technology. And I just was wondering, what processes have you created in your institution that will ensure compliance in these technical areas of procurement?
So what we have in place is that what we do is that now, prior to there's 2 steps that procurement is taking, and I will also share that with everyone. There's 2 steps that procurement is taking. The first thing that they do is they verify that the individual which is typically what all we're doing, is that they're not on the debarred list or the covered list that's put out in SAMS.gov or visual compliance. And then the second thing that we're doing is that we are including those representations and certs to all of our vendors to complete. And our procurement office have taken the step is that prior to issuing a purchase order to a vendor, they have that vendor complete the representation and certs. And we are maintaining that on file for a year. And so therefore they don't ask them to complete it each time we go back to them. They maintain it on file for 1 year, and then each year they have to go back and recertify, just like we have to do with the federal government when we're getting funding.
Thank you. And I've also asked David Hollingsworth from Texas if he would ask his question online as well. David, are you there? Well, actually, he had a comment. Hang on a second. I think he got about how they're handling it. Well,
okay, sorry, I was still muted, Jennifer.
Were you in the submarine again?
Yes.
Hey, David, you probably had a really great question too. You asked it just right now you got to try to remember it.
It was just more of a comment.
Okay.
From what I understand, our purchasing system identified keywords associated with those excluded vendors
Mm-hmm.
and entered that, I don't know how exactly, into our purchasing system. So if somebody creates a purchase requisition and it includes those words, it's going to get flagged. And then also all the commodities, the telecommunication commodities, are also routing to our sponsored project administrators so that they can review those as well.
Okay. Okay. All right. That's okay. So I do know our procurement office, it looks for the excluded vendor and purchases of those telecommunication equipment and services and stuff. So, and again, now how they're blocking them, I don't know how they're stopping those requisitions. I don't know that either. I do know that we have the process in place. We listed the excluded vendors. They are now, one of the things that I finally got them to do is go in and state, try to bookmark that spot so they can go out and look and make sure that the federal government doesn't, keep on updated as they add vendors. They know what vendors are out there so that we do not wind up being non-compliant. But again, anytime we're purchasing or procuring any of that equipment, we have the vendor do the certifications and reps that they have to certify that they are not. So because there's, so it's, I'm trying to remember what it's called, and maybe somebody on this call can help me, is where a vendor may procure that equipment that's on the prohibited list, but then they would take the label off, the tag off, and put theirs on it, right? And so those are some things that you have to be aware of as well, and that's what the procurement offices look like. But the federal government's been very clear, is that if a vendor is found to be doing that, then they would definitely be debarred. So in other words, if you're purchasing this prohibited equipment on this, that's on the list, and then you are turning around and removing the tag or any identifying labeling for that piece of equipment and putting yours on it, if they find out, then you're basically debarred. So, and I really don't see, yeah.
Yeah, and comment that a couple of people have made is that's just fraud. So
Yes.
you don't want
Absolutely.
you don't want to get in that situation
At all. You don't. You really don't. And so I look at it this way with this is, and I'm probably just like everybody else that's on this call when this new thing came down. It's like, oh, what next, right? I mean, here we go. We want to blame everything on 2020. So, but I just look at it this way is that I take in consideration that as, when you look at it as research as universities, institutions, right? We have to give due consideration to the very possibility that our operations, right, that what we do could raise national security concerns. And so all of us doing our due diligence, yeah, let's scream and holler about here's another regulation that we have to comply with. But then you know what? Let's just set that aside and let's just go ahead and do what it is that we have to do.
Well, I think you said it a lot when you said if we want to use the government's money, we've got to go by the government's rules and regulations.
And I look at the government's money as their playground, right? There, if it's my backyard, you want to play, I'm gonna make the rules, right? And that's what the government is doing. So we just look at it that way, So I say if you want, so if we keep that, just keep the mindset, and we have a lot of stuff to stress about. Let's not stress about the things that we can't change. And this is one of them, right? So let's focus on, we just can't. We just need to do the best that we can, ensure that we're compliant. All of our goals on this call is to make sure that whatever our university is in the news for, it's good stuff, it's positive stuff. It's not right. You see what I'm saying? And we definitely don't want to be on anybody's PowerPoint presentation at the next FRAC meeting on compliance or, we definitely don't want that. So we just, we have to do our part. And yes, our faculty members are going to kick and scream and holler. It just tickles me because every time the federal government come out with another policy or regulation or something that we have to comply to research, they automatically blame it on me. It's the nature of the beast. It's what we do. I guess it's what make our job really enjoyable and interesting is that there are a lot of challenges out there, so we can never stop learning and knowledge sharing.
That's exactly right. And I want to thank you again for sharing your knowledge with us today. This has been illuminating and interesting, and both in what we learned about Zoom and what we learned about the other.
Yeah, and I want
and what we learned again about this fabulous group of people that we work with, who planning started immediately to try to problem solve on what we needed to do to get past the tinnitus our computers were trying to give us.
And so I just have one request from you, Jennifer. So next year, if we have to do this, do not have me follow all you Florida folks, right? Because I mean, you guys just set the bar so high. So right, I'm looking at everybody I'm following, and I'm going like, you know. So next time, yeah.
You were the dessert. You were the dessert. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone that attended today. And be sure you come back next year, because I always invite Gloria to come every year. She's always got something.